About the principles of social responsibility, as I was saying in the previous video, we have some principles provided in the standard, principles that should be considered and should be respected by any organization that intends to act in a socially responsible manner. However, I remind you that ISO 26000 is a guidance standard, so this should not be seen as the definitive list of social responsibility principles. Others can be added to this list if the company considers this necessary. So let's see, we have 7 principles in the standard. They are accountability, transparency, ethical behavior, respect for stakeholder interests, respect for the rule of law, respect for international norms of behavior, and number 7, respect for human rights. We will take them one by one, of course. And the first of them is called accountability, and it says that an organization should be accountable for its impacts on society, the economy, and the environment. Good, but what means accountability? What does it mean for a company to be accountable? Well, it means a state of being answerable for decisions and for activities. Answerable to the company's own governing bodies, answerable to the legal authorities, and in general, more broadly, answerable to the stakeholders. And accountability is also about accepting responsibility for situations where wrongdoing has occurred and taking measures to correct such situations and to prevent them from being repeated. Next principle, transparency. An organization should be transparent in its decisions and activities that impact on society and on the environment. In other words, this principle wants the company to make information available to those who have been or who may be affected by its operations. This information should be available, it should be accessible and understandable. The standard offers here some clarifications as to what an organization should be transparent about. So let's see some of those aspects: the purpose, nature, and locations of its activities, the identity of any controlling interest in its operations, the manner in which its decisions are made, implemented, and reviewed, any standards that the company may use to evaluate its social responsibility performance, the source, amounts, and application of its funds, the known and likely impacts of its decisions and activities, or its stakeholders, and the methods that the company uses to identify and to engage stakeholders. Principle number 3, ethical behavior. It's a short and clear one. An organization should behave ethically. What this means? It means that the company's behavior should be based on the values of honesty, equity, and integrity. There should be a concern for people, for animals, and for the environment. There are some guidelines in the standard on what means for an organization to promote ethical behavior. For example, it should identify and state its core principles and values. It should adopt and apply standards of ethical behavior and communicate those standards to employees, to suppliers or contractors. It should prevent or resolve any conflicts of interest that may lead to unethical behavior. It should have mechanisms in place to monitor, to support, and to enforce ethical behavior. It should have systems for reporting cases of unethical behavior without fear of reprisals. It should recognize and address those situations where local laws or regulations do not exist or they conflict with ethical behavior. And another example, the company should respect the welfare of animals when its activities affect their lives and existence. Next, another principle of social responsibility is respect for stakeholder interests. An organization should respect, consider, and respond to the interests of its stakeholders. A stakeholder is by definition an individual or a group who has an interest in any decision or activity of an organization. And we will discuss more about stakeholders a little bit later. But in this principle, the idea is that although a company's objectives may be limited to the interests of some stakeholders, like the owners of the company, the employees, or the clients, There are also other interested parties, other stakeholders who may have rights, claims, or specific interests, and they must be taken into consideration. The company should identify its stakeholders, recognize their interests and their legal rights. It should respond to their expressed concerns. It should recognize that some stakeholders can have significant influence on its activity, or the company should take into account its stakeholders' ability to contact, to engage, and to influence the organization. We move on. Respect for the rule of law is principle number 5 of the 7 in the standard. An organization should accept that respect for the rule of law is mandatory. This is quite obvious. An organization that intends to be socially responsible will accept that no individual and no organization stand above the law. The company will need to be aware and always informed about the laws and regulations in force, ensure that its relationships and its activities comply with legal requirements, and it should evaluate periodically its compliance status. Going on, number 6 of the principles in the standard is called respect for international norms of behavior, and it says that an organization should respect international norms of behavior while adhering to the principle of respect for the rule of law, the one we discussed before. This principle is more specific than the rest, and it may apply only in certain situations. For example, when the law or its application do not provide adequate safeguards, the company should try, as a minimum, to respect the international norms of behavior. In countries where the law or its implementation conflicts with international norms of behavior, a socially responsible organization would be expected to respect the international norms of behavior to the greatest extent possible. In countries where there is a conflict between the local legislation and the international norms of behavior, and if not following those international norms will have significant consequences, the organization is advised by the standard to review as possible and feasible the nature of its relationships and activities within that jurisdiction. If and as possible, an organization should try to look for legitimate opportunities and channels to influence authorities to remedy any such conflict, and it should avoid being complicit in the activities of other organizations that are not consistent with the international norms of behavior. And finally, number 7 in this enumeration, the next principle and the last one is called respect for human rights. It says that an organization should respect human rights and recognize both their importance and their universality, meaning that they are applicable everywhere in all countries, cultures, and situations. If in its operations a company deals with situations where human rights are not respected, it should take steps to respect human rights and not take advantage of situations where they are not respected.